You're the co-founder and CTO of U.com. I'm super grateful to have you on the show because U.com is a really cool company. I've been using U.com for some time now. And you can explain this better than me, but I'll kind of tee you up for it, is that U.com, it reimagines search by, instead of having a search engine, it's what you describe as a do engine. And so the first product that made a big splash was connecting us to lots of different large language models. So you can go to U.com. It's free to use, or at least there's some kind of amount that you can use it just for free. You can sign up with your email or log in via Google or Apple authentication, and then there's dozens of different LLMs that you can choose from. So if you want to be using the latest state-of-the-art models from Anthropic or OpenAI, they're there, or open source models, they're there. So anyway, so that's kind of like that was my introduction to U.com. It's probably what I use it for the most. But yeah, tell us more. You can do a much better job pitching it than me, I'm sure.
I don't know. I don't know about that, but you did a fantastic job. But if I were to add on, I would say the model agnosticism, if you will, is definitely a big selling point. People love coming to U.com for the latest and greatest to try out OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini, wherever. A lot of the most recent open source models are typically there. We work with all of these companies and the groups that are making these models to make sure that we're going to have them as early as possible. And it's just really convenient for people to have, say, one place that they can go to try these things out side by side, to some extent for free. And then they can also go into our more premium modes and get a subscription. And that's where you can access maybe some of the more advanced models to a greater extent, like larger context windows, more advanced file upload features, and some of the premium offerings where we decide which models to use for more complex use cases, like really deep research.
So that's something that I'd love to understand. And obviously you're not going to be able to go into, intellectual property and spill all your secrets, but for example, yeah, listen up, listeners. So instead of clicking on, say, GPT-4o, I can click on smart as the kind of, as the, I guess that's not the LLM that I'm choosing, but I'm choosing kind of like smart mode in U.com. And by the way, listeners, U.com is YOU.com, like not me.com, but U.com. And that must have been an expensive URL, but
I'll get to that. Yeah. Let me touch on smart mode. There's a research mode. That's my personal favorite. And there's also a genius mode, but we're in the process of essentially combining research and genius into something more advanced. So smart mode is our version of a GPT-4o, but then surrounded with maybe a dozen other models that are improving and rewriting your queries, that are potentially rewriting prompts and dynamically constructing prompts for your use case and your intent, so that we pick the best prompt, the best model, and also try to include a little bit in smart mode of like citations so that it's a little bit more grounded in search results. Now, the next step up, so smart mode is free. That's the free one. That's what you can go to. And if you don't want to think about which model to use, you use a smart mode. Research mode, for me, that's where it's at, because in that one, we're using more advanced models by default for everything. Every time you type in a query, we're not just doing a search behind the scenes, but we're doing multiple searches behind the scenes for all the things that you probably should ask, but you didn't in that original query, going and getting all of those search results back. And then that model is optimized less for, or that system really, that mode is optimized less for quick, factoid, concise answers, and more for comprehensiveness and accuracy, and being really, really grounded in that information. So if you try a research mode and compare it to a smart mode response, it's gonna be much longer. You're gonna get very accurate citations, usually one per sentence, essentially, and you're gonna get 100 different sources or something like that, so that you can use it. You can start to see what it would be used for if you were like a biological researcher or an analyst or something like that.
Very cool. And this actually, what you're describing, it reminds me of some of the kinds of things that I'm doing in my own company at Nebula with our LLMs. And this is the kind of thing that you might have some experience with because you are an advisor at literally a competitor of my company. It's called MoonHub. And I dare say MoonHub is the best known of the companies in my space. So these kind of talent acquisition, automation platforms. And well, we have an encoding LLM so we have 180 million public profiles that we've scraped of people in the US, the professional information, and we've asynchronously, we have pre-computed vectors using an encoding LLM for each of those 180 million people. So for our listeners, you can think of that as a big table or a big spreadsheet where it has 180 million rows representing each of these people, each of these profiles. And then there's 1,000 columns representing that are just numbers. And those 1,000 columns indicate a location in space. And so somewhere in our 1,000-dimensional space, there's data scientists. And then probably nearby them, there's data analysts, and software developers are probably not far away. But servers at restaurants would be in probably quite a different space of this space. And actually, the word server is a good example because what's great about these kinds of sophisticated embeddings, these vectors, in the way that they're created with modern LLM, is that a word like server would mean a very different thing in the context of somebody who's talking about liquor and food relative to somebody who's talking about Python and SQL.
Absolutely.
And so anyway, we have like that encoding LLM, and then in real time, we allow people to write queries, and we convert that query also into that 1,000-dimensional space. And then you can rank in milliseconds the top people in the US. You rank those 180 million people for the query that the person put in. But people don't always put in optimal queries, kind of like you were just describing. And so we have our own generative LLM that takes whatever input people provide to us, and we convert that into something that's optimized for our encoding LLM to turn into a vector downstream. And so it sounds like you guys have done a similar kind of thing where for I guess each of the different kinds of models out there, like the OpenAI API or the Claude API or the Cohere API, you've figured out different tricks with prompts and with restructuring, or it sounds like even rerunning in research mode, running maybe multiple queries. Yeah, and so everything that you're saying kind of makes sense to me, and I probably went into way too much detail about my own use case.
No, it's great. I love it because that's a big component of our stack as well. You can imagine the flow for us in a research mode looking something like a query comes in. We ask an LLM, hey, what are the top 3, 5, 10 queries that should be asked? So it's not just rewriting the query. It's actually a little bit more than that. To ask the questions that you're not asking that could be relevant. And then we'll go out and do searches for all of those. So we'll go to some sort of search engine, like the one we've built internally, but also potentially external tools. Maybe some of the search is done through a vector database, the way you're describing, and sometimes it's a lexical-based search. Those things are all part of what I call like understanding and intent understanding. So depending on the intent of the user or the type of query we're dealing with, all of these things can vary. Sometimes we'll personalize the answers. Sometimes we won't. Sometimes we won't do a search at all. But then once you get all of these sources back, you can bring them in, you could just put them into a context window for a generative LLM. But you can spend a lot of time optimizing that prompt. And so what we've found is for every model, there's an ideal way or a more ideal way to write prompts. And actually, for every combination of model and even to some extent like user, you can change these things to get much better responses. We'll have then models that are checking. So we'll go out and instead of a normal RAG-based approach that maybe pulls in some of these documents, but pulls in snippets and summarizes them, we'll actually go out and crawl the pages live again in research mode to make sure that they're 100% up to date and fresh. So yes, you're using the search index as a cache to know where to go, but then you actually do go get the freshest, latest up-to-date information, and we'll have models then go in and check, okay, did this sentence generated by the language model actually say what that source said? Because sometimes even if you give them a source, they'll hallucinate, right? So you have to, we check for implication and entailment in both directions. And sometimes it's okay if one direction is off. But again, that depends on the intent, depends on what people are asking. So again, there's like maybe a dozen or so models that will run on a single research mode query, which is part of why that might take a little bit longer. But the output is usually so much better and more accurate. And we can see user behavior changing to ask for more of that. You know, people are willing to wait a couple extra seconds if the output is dramatically better. If the output wasn't dramatically better, then speed is king. But if you can do something that feels almost magical, then it's worth waiting for. And now we're seeing this translate into B2B use cases for us, which are where it gets really, really exciting as well.
Nice. What does a company get, like a VC firm that's working with you or a biotech company? Or, maybe there's people at companies that are listening that they think, wow, I'd love to be using U.com in a B2B use case. What are the kinds of advantages of engaging in that way and kind of having that B2B enterprise relationship as opposed to just going to U.com and getting a subscription and using the research tool there?
Yeah, there's you can start. So typically what we see is some individuals start with U.com. They're using it. They try out research mode. They get a subscription, but then fairly quickly they want to use it for work, and they want to start uploading files that maybe they need some data guarantees on, or they want to see shared responses or something like this. They want to be able to collaborate on those things. And so then you can move into the Teams options on U.com. Then you can move into the enterprise options. But once you get further beyond that, once you maybe have some specific needs that aren't offered by the out-of-the-box platform itself, then it really makes sense to reach out to us, because sometimes we'll help people integrate our APIs so they can build some of their own solutions and their own tooling. So some people just use U.com as it is, and that's essentially, if it's doing everything you need, great. That is what it's there for. If you need to build an internal tool for your company that looks a lot like U.com, but it can't run, on the public web or something like that, well, then you can use all of our APIs, which back Smart Mode. We have a Smart API, Research Mode, we have a Research API, and we can make those work over your data. And if you just don't want to think about the rest, we'll help you do that. And then you can have your application. So a lot of people at this point, in fact, my favorite customers are the ones that have spent maybe a year or so with 5, 6, maybe a dozen people trying to build a RAG-like solution using OpenAI and following a blog post to set up a vector database and do this. And they just don't really see the ROI, or they don't get it adopted within their company. Like a lot of large companies are not seeing adoption, even once they've built their internal RAG tool. And we can come in and bring all of these extra models, this extra, oftentimes I'll call it like a trust layer on top, like actually make this stuff work, right? And make it trustworthy for your employees. And that's where, we'll walk them through evaluations if they don't have evaluations set up. And if they do, then we crush those evaluations and show them how much better it will be with our technology on top. At the same time, you're future-proofed again against future models coming out from OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera. It's the same reason you might not want to be locked into a single vendor on anything crucially important. You can come to you.com for that as well.
Well, everything you're saying, Bryan, makes a huge amount of sense to me. It sounds, with my entrepreneur hat on, or if I were a VC investing in things, it seems like you guys have figured out all the angles just right in terms of having a great B2C product, a valuable B2B product, getting those enterprise kinds of functionalities in there, like collaboration and data protection, customization. And yeah, it must be really exciting to be working on a product like this.
It's been a phenomenal year for the company, and it makes it a really exciting time to partner with folks that also have alignment with like our longer term roadmap. And if there's anyone out there that kind of knows anything about my background or my co-founder's background, we try to push pretty hard on the innovation front. And so we've always got a million ideas that we're looking for design partners to work with as well. And if there's just something that you can't quite find out how to do with you.com or otherwise, then I think it still makes sense to kind of chat with us and see whether that's something that we're looking at doing.
Yeah, super cool. When people hear some of the functionality that you've been describing so far, like particularly this idea of bringing back results from the web, using LLMs to present that, some of our listeners might think of Perplexity, for example. How do you guys distinguish against them?
Yeah, so Perplexity and us, I would say maybe a year or so ago, year and a half now, very, very similar. They've continued down a path that is seemingly much more focused on the consumer side of things and those kind of Google replacement queries, to be your replacement for a daily driver search engine. We're really not focused on that anymore. For us,
we're not focused on you.com.
we're focused on you. Yeah. Not Google.
Right.
We're focused on these deeper, more complex automated workflows. That's kind of where our technical and product roadmap is going, where we can, our functionality is getting further and further away from those quick, concise knowledge, like quick knowledge-based answers that you can find on the web, and focusing more and more on where do you get the most value in your company? What could be automated there? How could we double your productivity or double your bottom line or whatever the metric is without changing your headcount at all? Everything related to that, that's what's most important to us. So our success is really dependent on customer success. It has nothing to do anymore with, beating Google or having a certain market share of the search space. That's just something we're not focused on. We're just focused on you, as you eloquently said before.